Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 448 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. It is Sunday, October 9th, 2022. I am your host for this episode. I am Sam Klein. I'm coming to you from my home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I am joined only today by Jason Evans. Jason, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, Sam. I had a very interesting Saturday. Went down to the flats. That's what they call it here in Atlanta. And I watched Duke play some football.
Jason watched Duke play a disappointing football game. We're going to talk about that football game. Donald Wine is not here. He is off in Europe, ensuring victory for the various U.S. soccer teams. So I'm sure we'll hear from him coming soon. Jason, I think that Countdown to Craziness is only days away. Like the basketball season is sneaking up on us in a weird way because we've been talking football. So after the break, we are going to discuss the recent announcement that Jeremy Roach has been named the sole captain for Jon Scheyer's first Duke men's basketball team. Before we get there, though, Jason, as we mentioned, you were at the football game yesterday. It was a bit of a sloppy affair. Duke loses 23-20 in overtime to Georgia Tech. Duke was down 20-6 late in this game and managed to come back to force overtime right at the end of the game. It was pretty thrilling, relied on some timely Georgia Tech penalties to push it into overtime, but then the Blue Devils were not able to convert on their opportunity in the first overtime period. Took a desperation, very long field goal that came up short and wide. So, Jason, give me a rundown of what you saw yesterday in Atlanta with the Blue Devils now 4-2.
Well, I mean, there are so many different things to talk about from this game. There was someone who emailed with me who said, and I thought this was really apt, Sam. They said that this game was Duke's gone in 54 seconds game for football, except with the wrong ending. And folks, if I think most of you who listen to this podcast know what I'm talking about, but Gone in 54 Seconds is, of course, the legendary game in 2001 against Maryland, where the Blue Devils had this big comeback led by Jason Williams late in the game, where they scored 10 points in the final 54 seconds and force overtime, and then the Blue Devils win. It is part of the, truly legendary series of games that Duke had against Maryland that year. But what a lot of people don't remember about that game is it was, for the first 39 minutes, Duke was terrible. They were just not good at all. And as a result, the game becomes legendary, but we don't remember everything that happened. This is very similar to that because it's not going to be legendary because Duke lost in overtime. But if we'd won in overtime, it would be one of those like, oh my God, where were you kind of things. It was a horrible game to watch. I mean, Duke was pretty thoroughly outplayed throughout virtually this entire game. There were a lot of folks on the Duke Basketball Report bulletin boards who said they gave up and stopped watching. There was even one guy who posted who said he was at the game. Like me, he had gotten tickets. I was in the press box, but he'd gotten tickets for the game, and he said he walked out during the fourth quarter, and he had to find out about the comeback, listen to the comeback in his car on his driving home, which was probably terrible. I mean, Duke found a miraculous way to tie the game at the very end, and then we looked like we had a great chance to win it all after we forced Georgia Tech into a field goal. It looked like Duke had a first down inside the 10-yard line in overtime. And then the flag comes out. It's an offensive pass interference penalty. It backs Duke up so that we're both looking at a third and forever. And we're, pretty much out of field goal range, 50-plus yard field goal, which is a big ass for a college field goal kicker. And so, like, in literally a matter of seconds, it went from we were going to win to we were going to lose. Sam, I got a ton to say. I want to let you get in a little bit, but ESPN, has this little, pie chart thing or graph where they are graphing your chance to win the game at any given moment. And at one point during the fourth quarter, with about 9 minutes or so left in the fourth quarter, Georgia Tech was better than 98% to win the game. Like, basically, the folks who said, oh, I left, I checked out, they weren't wrong. I mean, Georgia Tech was one of these games where there was no way Duke was going to come back. And then, miraculously, Duke did come back. And in overtime, the graph shot up, and Duke was actually a 66% chance to win the game in overtime at one point. And then, of course, the penalty happens, and things go south, and it it's all done. I got a ton more. Do you want to get in all? How should we do this? Should I just keep on rambling?
No, let me give a few thoughts here. One of which is that it occurred to me this morning. Let me do a quick big picture thing. It occurred to me this morning that there is a somewhat scary parallel to last season, where Duke won its first 3 games and then lost 9 games in a row. This year, Duke has gone 4-1 so far. This, it was 4-1 through its first 5 and has now gotten to 4-2. And the schedule basically gets harder from here with a couple of bad ACC exceptions. But Duke still has to play Pittsburgh. They still have to play Wake Forest. They have to play North Carolina this weekend. UNC is a very different team than basically all the teams that Duke has played this season. I don't know that Carolina is better than Kansas, but all of that is coming up. So I am aware of this. I think that the circumstances are different this season for Duke, and
it just, if I can, it feels very different. I mean, remember that part of that start, that supposedly good start last year, was a loss to Charlotte. I mean,
right. Thank you for the correction there, Jason. Duke lost its first game, won its next 3, and then proceeded to lose its final 8 last season.
And the other thing is, it wasn't like Duke didn't look nearly as good as they've looked thus far this season. I mean,
exactly. And the other thing I would say to that is that, you pointed out Duke played terribly for the first, most of this game, and then was able to mount a comeback to force the overtime. That alone should be good evidence for Duke fans that there is a better win coming than the wins that it's had so far. You could argue whether Northwestern or Virginia is Duke's best win of the season so far. I think Duke is going to beat a better team than both of those teams sometime between now and the end of the rest of the season. But the other thing that is, I'd say, was most troubling from yesterday was the penalties, not just procedural penalties, but penalties with Shaka Hayward getting thrown out of the game, and all of that was really more of what did Duke in than poor execution. Look, Duke is not recruiting 4- and 5-star guys primarily for its football team. This is not the basketball team's recruiting apparatus. What usually has been Duke's strength, even in the height of the Cutcliffe era, was discipline, and there was a genuine and total lack of that throughout most of the game yesterday. That's ultimately what cost Duke a lot of its opportunities early in the game, and that's what cost Duke its opportunity in overtime.
Yeah, so a couple different things I want to do here, and I think I may do one of them and then do the other. Just so, Sam, so you can see, I've got a little notepad of notes that I was jotting down while I was sitting in the press booth, and I want to get to those in a minute. But before I do, you mentioned the turnovers, and I'm sorry, not the turnovers, the penalties. I did want to. There are a couple things I wanted to say about the game in general before I get to sort of my observations from the press box. Jordan Calhoun was hurt early in the game for Duke. He's sort of our most reliable receiver. Why am I talking about this related to penalties? Well, because he got hurt, Jontavius Robertson, who really hasn't played a lot this season. He's like probably the 4th, 5th wide receiver kind of situation. When Calhoun got hurt, Jontavius Robertson started playing a lot more and was on the field in key plays a lot more. And as a result, he was the guy who committed the offensive pass interference penalty that got Duke backed up in overtime, that took us from inside the 10 to being in a situation where we're looking at a long field goal. He was also the guy, believe it or not, who had he had like a late hit unnecessary roughness penalty in the first half. Duke had moved into field goal range. Certainly we were, threatening perhaps to score. And there was a play where there's a bit of a pileup, and he came into it late and committed an unnecessary penalty that again, backed Duke up and took us out of field goal range. And one of the stories of the game, in my opinion, was how often Duke would drive inside the Georgia Tech 40, and then the drives stalled or ended in a turnover. We lost the turnover battle. We had Riley Gunner had a really bad interception that ended a drive. But I counted, Duke had 6 drives until the very last drive of the game where we scored a touchdown. We had 6 drives where we went inside the 40, and we came away with a total of 6 points on those 6 drives. That's That's atrocious. I mean, you can talk about red zone, but frankly, once you get inside the 40, you start going, okay, let's count the yards. We need like 5 more yards here or so to be in field goal range. And Duke was consistently getting inside the 40, sometimes inside the 30 or even the 20, and coming away with 0 points. It was really, really frustrating. And I do want to point out, by the way, as much as I admire the resilience of the team, they never gave up. They continued fighting. There was some illusion in this comeback that happened for Duke. First of all, the first part of the comeback was a phenomenal punt return, and Samir Hagans, the guy who returned the punt, had other big punt returns earlier in the game. I at one point I was wondering, I was like, why is Georgia Tech continuing to punt the ball to Duke? I would have punted the damn ball out of bounds. I would have been like, look, let's give up 10 yards of field position to punt the ball out of bounds and not let Samir Hagans bring it back again. Because that dude was our best offense was our punt return. But on Duke's final drive, Sam, we took it 80 yards. We went from the 20 to the end zone in like 2 minutes. It was huge. You could say, wow, great, amazing drive. It is definitely worth noting. Of the 80 yards that we went, 43 of them were from 3 penalties by Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech got a rushing the passer. They got like a late hit or something. I forget what it was, but an unnecessary roughness penalty. Both of those for 15 yards each. And then there was a pass interference for 13 yards. So on Duke's final drive that we all feel so good about, more than half the yards came from Georgia Tech committing penalties. And the reality is there's, I'm not putting the blame on him, but there's no way to say it other than this. Riley Leonard was just playing bad. I mean, Tech was blitzing and they were getting to him. And his top receiver, like I said, Jordan Calhoun, was out. And the other guys weren't getting a lot of separation. But still, Riley needs to be better. There were times where he had time and he just made a bad throw. There were guys who were open, especially deep downfield, and Riley Leonard was not able to make the pass the way we've seen him earlier this year. He has been super accurate this season. I think at one point in the past couple of weeks, he was like the most accurate passer in the ACC, or maybe even, one of the most accurate passers in all of major, Power 5 football. And he was not accurate at all yesterday. So I was very bothered by that. And then the other thing was, I feel like the Duke coaching could have been better. Our play calling felt incredibly conservative. And there were just times, you mentioned the penalties, but there were other times Duke did things that just didn't feel like a team that was using its head. There was one that really stuck out to me. There was a punt in the first half where one of those times where Duke had a drive where we got to the 40 and then couldn't get any further. And so we punted the ball to Georgia Tech. And it was really a perfect punt that we should have downed inside the 5. Heck, we probably should have downed it like the 2 or the 1. But the guy who went to down it went into the end zone. And, when he downed the ball, and as a result, it's a touchback. And that was the drive that Georgia Tech then took the other way and ended up getting their first points of the game. If you execute that play properly, if you don't go into the end zone, which is sort of, you just cannot go in the end zone if you're a guy downing the ball. If you don't go in the end zone, then you've got Georgia Tech pinned. And I don't think they drive 9 yards to get points the way they did when they started from their 20. Anyway, I've been going on and on. Like I said, I got more. It was a frustrating day. I thought the offense especially was really bad.
To the point about the conservative play calling, this is probably more of what we can expect from a Mike Elko-led team than a David Cutcliffe team. We talked during his hiring process about how the team was going to approach a lot of things differently. Elko is a much more conservative, defensive-minded coach, obviously came up as a defensive coordinator. So these are sort of the changes that a 23-20 final score in this era of Duke football may feel like a high-scoring game relative to the very high-scoring affairs that we were used to under Cutcliffe. So, Jason, I hear it, and I need to I have to decide how concerned I am about the conservative play calling and Leonard looking like he was a little overwhelmed, because some of this might just be growing pains for a team with a lot of new guys, especially on offense, and then entering ACC season. Georgia Tech, might be the best team they've played so far. They might not, right? Duke has played a couple of other teams that are probably of similar caliber. And You're shaking your head.
Kansas is better than
Kansas is better, right? But sorry. So Kansas that Duke lost to, right? If we ignore Kansas, the one team that Duke lost to on the road, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if the environment at Georgia Tech was nearly as difficult as it probably was at Kansas, with them all hyped up over the fact that the team was playing well. It didn't seem like it was particularly full down there in Atlanta yesterday, but
it was homecoming, and they had 30-something thousand. There was one side of the field, like there's a shaded side of the field and there's a sun side of the field. The sun side of the field was not very full. The shaded side was pretty full.
This is a dynamic that Duke fans who go to games at Wallace Wade Stadium are familiar with. In the
yes.
in games in September, the shady side is full, like in front of the press box, and then as the season goes on, everyone seems to migrate over to the opposing sideline. It seems like, because that's where it's more comfortable. But all of that being said, I'm sort of waiting until next week to see how Duke responds from this loss, goes to UNC, and sees how I want to see how Duke responds to this and plays against Carolina, a Carolina team that's coming off a thrilling win from yesterday. I sort of thought last week maybe we're getting Georgia Tech at the right time because they've had a little bit too much excitement recently. I was wrong. Let's see if Duke can pick themselves up and put on a better showing against UNC next week. If we see a lot of the same, missed targets and penalties and things next week, then I'll probably be a lot more concerned than I am right at this moment.
Well, it's worth noting. Duke's schedule, we get UNC and at Miami for the next two games. Those are going to be tough games. Duke will most assuredly not be favored and could easily, probably will be a 7+ point underdog in both of those contests, because Carolina and Miami are arguably the top two teams in our half of the ACC. I think probably, maybe, perhaps. Anyway, so those will be tough games. But the key games on Duke's schedule coming up, we've got, after those two games, we've got Boston College and Virginia Tech back to back, and BC and Virginia Tech are games where, unless Duke completely tanks from here, you would expect the Blue Devils to be favored in both of those games. We were favored against Georgia Tech. Duke was a 3.5 point pick over Georgia Tech. So, even if you're favored, doesn't mean anything's a given. But as this team sort of searches its way to get to 6 wins and get to a bowl, those are the two really key games coming up. If we are, I'm not saying we're going to lose to North Carolina and Miami, but to me, I think the tail of the season will probably be written largely by the BC and Virginia Tech games.
And by the way, Jason,
I'd love to steal one though.
Duke gets UNC and Miami coming up, you mentioned, and then they get a bye before they go to Boston College, which will probably be well needed, regardless of the outcome of the next two games.
All right, so my last thing on this, like I mentioned, I have my little notebook, and I just want to really quickly let folks know about the notes that I took while I was sitting in the press box. This is sort of, more personal observation, I guess you would say it. First of all, the Georgia Tech press box served pulled pork with just the worst barbecue. It was atrocious. They had really good pulled pork, and the barbecue sauce to put on it was this was not Southern quality barbecue. I don't know what that sauce was. It was tasteless. It was more orange than like red. I don't know. It was just it resembled no barbecue sauce I've ever eaten.
Was it a mustard-based barbecue sauce, perhaps? If it was more orange than red?
No. I don't think it was. There may have been a little bit. Sam, I'm telling you, it was so tasteless. I couldn't even do is this mustard or vinegar or ketchup? Like, I don't. It might have been a salad dressing, man. I'm really
people are really sad for the free food that you got at the Georgia Tech football game.
The free food was not up to par. I will say
it still might have been better than the Wallace Wade Stadium food from 15 years ago.
It probably was. They had sodas, and for some reason I got thirsty. I must have downed like 5 Coke Zeros. So I almost missed key moments of the fourth quarter because I was headed to the bathroom a lot. Anyway, sorry. So I did want to praise the Duke fans in attendance. There was a pretty decent number of Dukies who were there. They filled up almost 4 to 5 sections of the end zone of one area of the end zone that was designated as the Duke area. So I really thought the Duke fans did a nice job of showing up. And as worth noting, in overtime, when the Georgia Tech fans were stunned that we were still playing, that it was in overtime, you could hear the Duke fans chanting defense, defense, louder than anyone from Georgia Tech shouting anything. So hat tip to the Duke fans. The PA system. I have to say something about the PA system at Georgia Tech. It was really loud. Like, I don't know. They turned that stuff up to 11, man. It was super loud. It overwhelmed any noise the crowd was making. And they have this thing whenever they score, or like if it's a key third down for the opposition, or if they get a first down, something good happens for Georgia Tech. The PA system plays the sound of a train, like a train. It's sort of like a combination of a train whistle, train engine kind of thing. So loud. I mean, like it caused me to like fall out of my chair one time. It was like unbelievable how loud and obnoxious and annoying this PA system was.
Jason, how old are you?
I'm 54, 55.
I complained recently about the, I don't remember what event I was at, but I was at some sporting event where I was like, the PA system here is too loud. And it was in that moment that I realized that I don't know what age it is that you age out of the target demographic, but I'm not in it anymore. So I think that's just what happens. I think that have you been to a game against, I think it's Navy that brings the cannon to all of their games. Have you been to a football game
that's
that Navy
cool.
plays
Wait.
in?
A cannon is cool.
It's cool. It's extremely cool. But let me tell you, if you aren't anticipating it, it is terrifying to hear. I've heard it. I think I heard it at Wallace Wade Stadium, and I worked a game where Duke was playing at Navy, and they fire that cannon off. Man, that thing is loud.
This just in, war is hell.
Cannons loud, turns out.
All right, so the last thing I have, I was like, wait, what's happening here? Midway through the fourth quarter, when Tech was, frankly, it looked, like I said, ESPN said Georgia Tech was 98% to win this game. There was a timeout. And the Georgia Tech has a big, impressive band. The band started playing Every Time We Touch. Now, I need to know. I don't know. Now they played it pretty well, and the cheerleaders were dancing and stuff like that. I mean, like it's possible that this is just part of their repertoire, that they just do this all the time. But I think it's also possible that the Georgia Tech band was seriously trolling Duke.
That seems like a fairly deep cut troll to be made.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I've been hearing that song in relation to Duke sports for so long that I don't even, I'm like too far in it at this point. So I don't know how much other fan bases like realize that is one of our songs. But it seems weird that the Georgia, it's possible they just didn't know. I would have bet that they don't even know that it's affiliated with Duke, and they were just playing it because it happens to be a fun song for a pep band to play. But if it is, bravo to them.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it is possible that it's just a fun song they play. I think it's also very possible. Band leaders, these guys, they talk to each other. They probably know what each other, I'm sure they pay attention to what each other's doing. I would not be at all surprised if the Georgia Tech band leader guy or gal, whoever it may be, was aware that Every Time We Touch, is sort of a special song to Duke. It may be something that they have, they may have 20 or 30 different songs that they sometimes play, and it could be one of them. But I thought it was, and the fact that it happened like at sort of, it was a timeout where I was like, I was almost ready to leave. I was like, because by the way, there was no press conference for me to attend. Mike Elko did his press conference virtually. It was not in person. It was over Zoom. I listened to it. There wasn't much, we didn't pull any sound because there wasn't much that was said in the press conference that I thought needed to be repeated on the podcast here. But anyway, so that was sort of my last thing. I was like, is Georgia Tech expert trolling here? I think they might have been.
To go back to your point about Duke doing a good job of filling up their section, I just did a quick look at the Duke roster. There are 16 guys on the Duke roster who are from the state of Georgia and 6 more from the state of Alabama. And I didn't do a check on South Carolina because I figure it's easy for them to get to a few other Duke games. But you got to figure that there's also a pretty good, not just alumni contingent, but even like the player family contingent that shows out for when Duke visits Georgia Tech.
And I do want to say thank you to the Georgia Tech athletic department for allowing me to sit on press row. It was a lot of fun. Sam, are you going to do it for Boston College?
I'm figuring out what my plan is for Boston College, because the game's on a Friday night, which is more. I am almost certain that I will be attending the game. The question is what time I'm going to be able to get there, because I have a job, like a day job, where sometimes I do have to work like into the evenings, even occasionally on a Friday. So I have to figure out what the move is. I have talked to a few friends in the area who are BC alums about the setup for going to the games, and the assurance that I got from one of my friends is that you can usually show up to the tailgate and find a ticket like falling out of someone's pocket in the parking lot. So,
hey, last thing I should note, you talk about friends. There were a lot of people who there were some folks who reached out to the podcast who were like, "Hey, Jason, I know you're coming to the game. I'd love to say hi." And there were people that I wanted to try and meet up with. It just never worked out. My day was too busy before the game, and the highways around Atlanta, tell me if this is a surprise. There's a lot of construction going on, and I knew that I was going to be in terrible traffic to even get to the game. And then the last thing was, as much as I thanked the Georgia Tech press office for, letting me sit in the press box and the such, my parking, admittedly, it was free. They had press parking. Press parking was, so to put it in Duke terms, the press parking was like they had us park in the Duke Gardens for a game at Cameron. It was a haul. It was a long. I looked at where the press lot was, and I was like, "Am I sure? Is this right?" I checked with someone. They go, "Yep," and I was like, "That's like a mile walk, man." So anyway.
A lot of I believe that the Duke game press parking is in the Science Drive garage, but if you get caught in the wrong spot, it can take you just as long to leave the game as if you had parked in the Duke Gardens. So, yeah, bummer. You didn't pay for that spot though, so that they feel like they're entitled to put you wherever they damn well please. So,
amen.
That's that is how it works, unfortunately. Yeah, I'll give an update as the BC game gets closer, and I'll have a better idea of what my plan is if there are folks who are up in these parts who are going to that game. Jason, let's take a quick break. We're going to come back and chat a little bit about Jeremy Roach, and then I don't know if listeners, if you have had a chance to watch the highlights of Victor Wenbanyama in the scrimmages that he was playing recently in Las Vegas. Oh boy, that dude is different. We're going to talk about him and Jeremy Roach, so stick around. As we mentioned before the break, the big news out of Duke basketball this week is that Jeremy Roach, the junior starting point guard for this upcoming season, has been named the sole captain of the Duke men's basketball team. So we wanted to talk just a little bit about that honor for Roach and what it might mean for the team. Jason, I will let you get us started.
So first of all, congrats to Jeremy Roach. I don't want to, talk down about him being named captain by saying it was obvious and expected and things like that. It is still an honor. It is still a show of respect. And it puts responsibility on Jeremy to show the rest of the team both his own personal leadership and what it means to be a player at Duke. It is worth noting that Jeremy Roach and Jalen Blakes are the only scholarship players who've ever played for Jon Scheyer at all, who've ever played at Duke at all. I mean, in truth, Jon Scheyer barely knows the rest of the guys on the team. And none of the other guys on the team, none of them know what it means to be a captain at Duke. So there wasn't a big pool of candidates, so to speak, for captain. But at the same time, I'm thrilled that Jeremy Roach was named captain. I think it is important that the team have a captain. A couple of years ago, the COVID year, we talked a lot on this podcast about the fact that Coach K didn't formally name captains. He had like this, what did he call it? His like a leadership group or something like that. It was like Wendell Moore and Matthew Hurt and I forgot someone else. It was not it was not a good situation, I think, and part of that team struggled to show leadership, and I think that was partially why. So I'm glad that Jeremy Roach was named captain. The only other guy, there was like some rumors out there. There was like a tweet that got misinterpreted or something that said that Jacob Grandison was also going to be named captain, and he wasn't. I don't necessarily think that the captaincy thing is all done. We have seen Coach K in the past add captains throughout the season, that if someone steps up in a leadership role, that Coach K says, hey, at a certain point in the year, that person has earned being called captain. And I think that could happen with this team. I think everybody prefers for there to be multiple captains, not just one. You want those extra voices, especially if the extra voice is, can be someone else on the floor. So I think Jacob Grandison has a chance to get there. I think Cale Ketchings, believe it or not, is a possibility as well. He's another guy who's very experienced, and he played a few years for Tommy Amaker at Harvard. So he has a little bit of a sense of what the Duke ethic is like. But I mean, clearly you need to be established, you need to be respected, you need to be probably a member of the rotation to have a real shot at being captain. So with that criteria in there, Jeremy Roach was the guy. And again, I think it's a good choice and it's the right choice.
The only sort of intrigue in this, Jason, was what you mentioned about potentially one of the grad students getting named captain. But I like this from the perspective of it's good to get returning Duke guys to be the captain here. I think that there's an element of the culture that is good to have continuity in from the previous regime, because as much as a lot of the same pieces are in place, a lot of the same structure is in place from last year, there's a enormous change at the top, and it's sort of hard to predict where the what holes get created by Mike Krzyzewski not being in the building every day are. And so naming a captain who has been here for a couple of years, who knows his way around, I think is helpful. The other thing that is good is that I believe this year we're going to hear a lot about Jon Scheyer pushing Jeremy Roach to be the alpha dog on this team and to step up when they need a bucket, or step up when they need motivation, or whatever. He's going to have to play not just the point guard role, but like the key sort of culture motivational figure. He needs to be one part Trey Jones, but he also needs to be one part Emile Jefferson. And I like the fact that he's taking the solo captain role, because it sort of tells him, like, man, this is your opportunity here. There are other guys who are experienced. There are guys who have played big roles on teams. You mentioned, I think Jacob Grandison is the best example of this, but Ryan Young and Cale Ketchings have both been on competitive D1 teams. So it's not like there's no one else on the roster that's never played in a big game, but Jeremy Roach is the only one that's played in big games down the stretch for Duke.
Well, and I think your point about Scheyer wanting to push Roach is so good, because we've heard that Jeremy Roach is not a guy who is a loud, vocal, forceful personality. He personally has talked about the fact that he needs to be more forceful. He needs to be more, aggressive of a leader, and that he needs to learn how to do that. Naming him captain says to him, "Okay, Jeremy, do it." And I think that's a big part of this, is not just what Roach brings to the team in terms of leadership and knowledge and understanding what it means to be a Duke player. Part of it is also inspiring Jeremy Roach to be even more of the things that he maybe struggles at a little bit, in terms of leading the team, and not just leading by example, but leading vocally.
Jason, can we spend a minute talking about Victor Wenbanyama? This is not Duke news, because there is no chance. There's no chance this dude is going to college. But folks, if you like basketball, then and if you haven't seen the highlights of Wenbanyama, he's a French. Technically, he's a professional basketball player over there in France. Plays for the French national team. Was in the G League Ignite event a few days ago.
Yeah, this was so Sam, this was like it was literally a showcase event that they put on, where they invited his French team and to play against the G League Ignite, which has Scoot Henderson and the sort of the presumption was, oh, this is Victor versus Scoot. Let's see which one of them is going to be the first pick in the NBA draft.
Which is a little silly because Scoot Henderson is a point guard and Victor Wenbanyama is an alien. So they play slightly different positions. And Scoot Henderson, I don't want to downplay the fact that in this game he was insanely good. Like a guy who, like, again, if he was coming to Duke, we would be like, oh my God. Imagine the things, like, we're excited to see what Dariq Whitehead does on this team. We're excited to see what Derek Lively does on this team. If we had Scoot Henderson or Victor Wenbanyama coming to Duke this season, we would be talking about them nonstop relative to those guys.
Yeah, let's be clear that Scoot will be the number 2 pick in the draft, and the team that gets him is not going to be like, they're going to be like, we're getting NBA experts say they look at Scoot Henderson and they go, that guy's a future NBA All-Star. The problem is he's in a draft with a guy who, like you said, is an alien. He literally looks like he's from another planet.
So Wenbanyama is 7'4". There have not been many guys in NBA history that have been 7'4". Like, full stop. It's like Yao Ming and Taco
Ralph
Fall
Sampson
and Ralph Sampson. Like, there are not that many guys that are this big. There was a great photo of him standing with Rudy Gobert, famously.
Oh my God,
famously enormous Rudy Gobert, and Wenbanyama's got like 2 or 3 inches on him. And
more than that.
Gobert's like standing next to him, like, cool. This is cool that I'm with this guy. He's not quite as thick as Gobert because he's only like 18 years old. But he's completely unstoppable because he can run right down the court and dribble, and he's 7'4". So
and
so
the 3-pointers in the first game, he was 7 of 10 from 3. In the second game, he hit a Steph Curry pull up from 30. It was ridiculous.
And he's like on the pick and roll, and he's got the ball, and the guy sets a pick for him, and he just like jab steps to the right and pops a 3 from like 28 feet. So anyway, go check out the highlights of Victor Wenbanyama if you haven't seen them yet, because it's awesome.
It is amazing to watch, but I just want to caution people about one thing. So he scored 37 in one game. He scored 36 the next, draining 3-pointers, blocking shots all over, like, literally.
It's not clear that he knows how to play on-ball defense yet, but it sort of doesn't matter because as soon as his man goes up for a shot, whether it's from 30 feet or if he drives around Wenbanyama and goes to the basket, he's going to just block it. Like, it doesn't matter. He's just too long.
It's amazing. But I'll tell you what I did. I went and I looked. I found the box scores. He plays for a French club called Metz 92. I found box scores from some of his recent games, and he has not been tearing up the French league the way he tore up the G League Ignite. Now, I don't know if that's because he just hasn't, it wasn't, he wasn't motivated as much in these French league games, or maybe he just had a good couple days. It's worth noting, in his most recent games in the French league, he had 23 points and 10 rebounds in one game, 19 and 6 in one game, 10 and 8. Now, those are good numbers, but they aren't 35 plus, hitting like 5, 6, 7 3-pointers. And in fact, in one of these games, he was 1 of 6 from 3. And he's only averaging 2 blocks per game. Now, 2 blocks per game is a lot, but based on what we saw, you would think he'd be averaging like 6 or 7 blocks per game. So maybe this is just a case of Wenbanyama having a couple really great days. So, I'm not so sure that everybody should be. There was a guy in my fantasy league. A fantasy NBA league. We're getting ready for our draft, who wanted to know if he could draft Victor right now this year. And we have a keeper league, so you can hold on to 2 players each season. And he's like, and I'll hold on to him for next year. And we were like, no, you can't do that. That's not the way the league works. But regardless, like, you only would do that with the top 30 player in the league. I don't know that Victor's going to come in. I don't think he's going to come in and be a top 30 player in the NBA from day one. The hype train may be accelerating a little too fast on this guy. He looks amazing. He looks like the future. He looks like an alien who's unstoppable. As people have said, he looks like Kevin Durant if Kevin Durant was going to average 4 blocks per game in the NBA.
Yeah, and if you stretched him out a few inches.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy.
His head is too small because his body is too long.
But I'm not. I just think let maybe slow our roll a little tiny bit. That said, I was the guy who said, Sam, we got to talk about Victor.
Yeah. You said we're doing. I had missed this because I hadn't been on Twitter that day, so I had missed the highlights, and then I went back and watched. And oh my God, I don't look. I remember watching Kevin Durant in college, and it was awesome, right? He was making shots that you couldn't believe, and his body was shaped in a way that you couldn't believe that someone could make shots at that shape. I think famously,
Exactly. Yeah.
like he couldn't bench his weight at the NBA Combine. He couldn't do one bench press of his weight at the NBA Combine, and everyone was worried, like, oh, he's not strong enough. And then, of course, he turned out to be Kevin Durant. So I'm very excited by this. Obviously, he's not coming to Duke. He's going to be the number one pick in the draft next year. There's when you Google him now, at least what the version of Google that I get is a series of articles about should X team tank for Victor Wenbanyama. It's like, are the Spurs going to do it? Are the Rockets going to do it? Are the Magic going to do it? All these teams, are they getting Wenbanyama in the next draft? So that's going to be the talk of the NBA season.
It's going to be an interesting NBA year because, yeah, the teams who, if you're a team where you're like, oh, maybe we could stretch and maybe get into like the bottom of the playoffs, those teams are all going to be like, nope, we're tanking because fans are going to be so excited about Victor Wembanyama that they are going to be more accepting of the tank than they usually would. Now, it's worth noting, you could win 0 games. You could be the worst team the NBA has ever seen. You have a 14% chance of getting the number one pick. It does not get higher than 14%.
So we'll see how many teams feel like they need to put themselves intentionally in that position. All right, Jason, let's leave it there for now. Donald is not here, so I won't say goodbye for him. He'll have to just come back and speak for himself someday. But for Jason Evans, I am Sam Klein. This has been episode 448 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Send us emails, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Countdown to Craziness is a week from Friday. It's on the 21st of October. So we have that coming up. Duke's got a football game against North Carolina this Saturday. So we would love to see Duke beat North Carolina. It's great when Duke beats North Carolina in any event, in any setting, at any time of the year. We love that sort of thing. And of course, we're I don't know. I'm still feeling a little bitter about the Final Four. So I'd like to forget about that entirely if we can. But we will be back, I am sure, soon to talk about all of that and more. So for Jason, I'm Sam. We'll talk to you again soon. Duke Band, take us home.